Koffi Kouakou. He's an African analyst, senior research fellow for the Center for China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Koffi, my man, how you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing very well. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. No issues at all.
Okay,
Thank you for
great.
joining me, man. I appreciate it. I had to bring you on because of what has been coming out on South Africa. Donald Trump
Mm.
has effectively went after South Africa and went so far as to offer white South Africans refuge. And I'm using it as a refuge in the United States over policy that he's saying is discriminatory in South Africa. Trump is making this argument that the ANC is somehow taking the land of white South Africans and that this is an abomination, this is discrimination. And as such, the US has taken a certain tack towards South Africa in lessening the money, or at the very least stopping the money that's going to South Africa in one sense, and browbeating it in the other sense on this notion of the ANC being this ogre government that is effectively stealing land. First, what is the reality of this? Is the ANC just taking land from white South Africans? Let's start there.
My brutal, simple answer is no. I think it's over dramatizing this issue. And there's no way, in fact, even with the new Appropriation Act, there's so many steps to be able to expropriate land from anybody. Before they do that, they're public lands. They're going to start with public lands. And I think even attacking private property is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Just that you have many, it's quite a syndrome for descendant of colonizers, old colonizers, to really have this sort of, it's right into the DNA, the fear that somebody else is going to take their land as their grandfathers or grandparent did to other people without compensation,
Right.
brutally. And I think this fear is still in the mind of many people. So anything that happens gets them to really react. It triggers them. But of course, it's quite natural. There also, of course, there have been some farm attacks on white farmers. That is something you can't deny. But coming to the point where you have a one-time, if you want, expropriation of land from white farmers, it is not true. There's a small group of white Afrikaners who have been very unhappy, and their descendants have been very unhappy. They don't have the power. They feel like, first of all, there's natural racism in their system. They just don't want to live with, people who are different from them or darker or whatever it is. So anything that this group does to them, it's just taking to the tilt or the hilt. Now, in fact, about 2,000 of them this past Saturday, 2 days ago, went on to the U.S. Embassy here in Pretoria to deliver a note. But most of the people deliver a note to the U.S. Embassy saying that they're really for it. They want to immigrate. They want the refugee status. They want to go to the United States. Many of them wearing brown shirts, or flying old apartheid flag, which is even, in fact, it's forbidden in South Africa. So they're counting the people around. They're just irritating people. But that's it's a democratic country, so they have a choice to show that. But in short, to answer your question, it's a no. There hasn't been any sort of blankets, expropriation of land from private landowners, Afrikaners, or anybody else. In fact, there's a great deal of people now. I think there are about 300 white pastors, white Afrikaner pastors, was lodged in some kind of protest against President Trump's attack on South Africa. So this is growing. It's creating a little bit of trauma, triggering both sides of the, if I want to call it, in the country, both browns and then white people, because it brings about racial issues, but most important, this sort of long-standing land issue that hasn't been dealt with. In fact, Black people are very angry with successive government for having done anything until they lost the complete, if you were, majority power in parliament. So that's a very big issue. South Africans are very worried, and as you know, President Ramaphosa is now going to be sending a team to Washington, but before sending the team to Washington, is sending them to Brussels, China, Brazil, the UK. Is on a big PR, if you want, roadmap, and it's not his fault because basically of the G20 summit that South Africa is hosting. He needs to work around it. He needs to make sure it's a successful summit. But it's going to be hard because already there's supposed to be in the next 2 days a finance ministers meeting of the G7 in South
Mhm.
Africa. Foreign minister also supposed to come. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, have refused. He's not coming. So that puts a little bit of a dent into the organization. And so South Africa is worried about the negative publicity and is trying to sort of work around that. And it's not going to be easy.
What is this talk on the ground in South Africa about this? Because as you point out, this it's not like America where you have like 300 years or 200 years of a gap between slavery. And by the way, you still see it in the States. Like you can look at the wealth distribution in America from blacks versus, let's say, whites, where you get like $14,000 that black people own versus 120,000 of wealth for whites. Like the number is goofy. It's absurd. And so you can imagine with South Africa, it's only been like 30, 40 years. So what is the talk on the ground? As you say, this is bringing up old wounds. What is this talk in the media space? What is the talk on the blogosphere? What is the conversation that's taking place in South Africa now as a
The
result?
conversation is really heated. On the blogospheres, I mean, black people are very angry. It's not just black people, but even white people, some people who think about human rights issues, regular land ownership and so forth. There's quite a small minority who are just stirring up and then being, Trump supporter. They even have this thing, make Afrikaners great again. They
Oh,
have
wow.
banners. Yes. So that's a protest that about 2,000 people took place on Saturday. But in the blogosphere, black and brown people are quite angry because they understand the significance and the pain that's been sitting with the idea of land not being distributed enough, but more so that black people in the majority are going through tough times. The economy is not growing. Unemployment is mainly hitting black people. Unemployment is about 33%, but that's official. We know that, I mean, this is an unbelievable percentage and number. And it's double digits, been going on for more than 10, 15 years. And you got to see and ask yourself, why in the world the government cannot grow the economy to push back unemployment and poverty? And so they're very angry, not just to their own against their own government, but also to the kind of foreign stir up that President Trump is already created with Elon Musk. His advisor and so forth should be understanding the situation better than anybody else hasn't. So that's the part on the blogosphere. In the news media also, I mean, there's a great deal of partisanship to push back against President Trump's one-time poorly misplaced disinformation and misinformation. But mainly the media sort of tend to play on the Washington side of things. So they're always very cautious, very lukewarm. Most of them are owned by a wealthy elite, and
Right.
they're more worried about, losing the benefits of trade between South Africa and the United States, especially around the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, as well as losing money from PEPFAR, the HIV/AIDS money and other monies that are flowing to them, because much of this kind of money flows to them.
Right.
But it trickles down to brown and black people. So the concern is really on their side. They're worried about trade issues. But also, they're concerned, they have a point that the government hasn't been able to kickstart the economy, deal with some of the most extraordinary challenges the country is going through. Extreme poverty, unemployment, especially for young people, hovering over 70, 75%. Also, inequalities. As you know, South Africa is now one of the most unequal country. The Gini coefficient is really high, which is about 0.67 or so. right about that point, and we know the effect of inequalities of anything, wealth, information, status, and so forth on the life and social stability. Very important. Crime is also a big issue. Corruption is a big issue. So there is a point the government must deal with these things. So it shows South Africa as weak domestically, internally. And so when somebody comes from outside and it ignites that kind of fire, people are really triggered and they're very angry.
But Kofi, it's been 30 years since the ANC has been in control. Why haven't they been able to deal with these issues, especially the land issue? That was one of the big issues after the apartheid state. And correct me if I'm wrong. I could be getting this wrong. I don't live there. But why hasn't the ANC dealt with these issues when they were in control?
Look, there was some worry that if they tackled it up front, especially on the time of Mandela, people already had the image of, land redistribution, Zimbabwe
Being
style, where all white people were chased out. So that image, it's sort of a specter that's really down, sort of reduced and diluted the momentum to deal with that. But most important, most of the Black people, I mean, the elite Blacks and bourgeois sort of uppity groups, they're very comfortable where they are. They don't have any other problems. They make money. Their lives are okay. So they don't see, by and large, the sort of some of the reason they talk about it, but they don't act on it. And that will be my explanation. But of course, the economy is not in their hands. They're also very worried that if they take drastic measures, the white people control the economy, will probably have it collapse or move somewhere else. So far, quote unquote, foreign direct investment is really very, very low in South Africa. So if the economy is not working, as you know as well, electricity provision to run and power the economy has been really deficient and weak. All these things force people to understand that the elite is not doing well. I mean, that is the short answer to your question.
Yeah.
But on my side, if you're personally, I think the elites really need to rack up. They haven't done as much as well that they should have done. They're really, and people are angry. And I can tell you, they're very worried that something might happen to push the unemployed youth, the wave of unemployed youth, to do something, to do what happened in Kenya last year when young people went on a rampage when the government increased the taxes. And in fact, on Wednesday, the Minister of Finance is supposed to share his budget speech and tell the country what sort of budget he has in mind, where the country is going to go, where it's going to allocate money, and so forth. But that's also going to be based on the President's State of the Nation address a couple of weeks ago. But it's a bit tense. People are very concerned.
What has been taking place with this unity government? I'm super curious about this because my take on this was, okay, this is the nose under the camel's tent. That this is the apartheid party worming its way back into the political space. That was the way I saw it. And I was like, if this happens, policy is going to be tweaked in a way that is going to be to their interests. What has been the case for this unity government?
Look, Jamal, many people thought the same. They had the same feeling. And I think you're right. There was a lot of suspicion. There's still a lot of suspicions. However, people are now saying, wait a minute, it looks like probably it's the best deal we ever got. And we need to stick with it because you need somebody to keep an eye on the African National Congress, corruption, looting, and so forth, and ministers where money disappears, there is no accountability. People are very worried. In fact, slowly people are now starting to change and say, let's give it a chance and see what happens. And the ministers, in fact, of the African National Government, of the African National Congress within the Government National Unities have been complaining that the ministers of a Democratic Alliance who are part of this GNU making them look bad in the sense that these guys are working. I mean, they really have a lot to prove. They have very little to lose. And they now have, as you said, they wormed themselves into the middle of this government. They're going to have to show that they are better than the other ministers. And so they're building up the image, their reputation as can-do ministers, right? So they're using social media every day to get a chance. They're sending out, they're communicating much, much better than the African National Congress ministers. And then they're giving a different vibe. I must say, I mean, the Minister of Home Affairs, for example, or Minister of Agriculture, they're doing all their best they can to get the information on, inform their own people. And they're doing as well as we didn't think they would do. So it's really steady. People are still ready to give them a chance. And people still believe somebody's got to keep a hand and an eye on the African National Congress ministers just for accountability. It's just amazing. So if it works well, we're still waiting for the next year or maybe 2 years to see how it's going. There was some kind of problems a while ago where people were forcing the hands of the Democratic Alliance ministers to quit the government of national unities. But I think the Democratic Alliance, they're smart enough. They know they're in it and they can't let it go easily. And it's their best chance to really make things, to change things, to really own up to things, to show to the people that, look, if you elect us, we'll do much better than the African National Congress.
Oh, that is fascinating. That is
It is.
fascinating. God, man, I can't believe the ANC has let that group get back into
Yeah.
political power. I'm just that is amazing to me. I want to go to something else. You pointed out, and you sent me the email effectively saying I was skeptical about it,
I
and
know.
this had to do with energy device that was being created, produced in Africa, that was extending battery life just in perpetuity for all intents and purposes. Go into that just for a moment. I want to go into larger subjects that are taking place in Africa, but I do want to hit this before we close this.
Sure. We can briefly talk about it. Look, this is something, if you've ever noticed, it's gone viral the past week or two, where this young man called Maxwell Chikumbutso has managed to come out with, and he's been on this thing for many years now, since I think 2018. He's managed to put some kind of energy device together to power any motor and to create energy, almost unlimited energy, which I call, he called it microsonic energy. I call it always on energy. I hope he gives me credit for that, always on energy, because you don't have to, he's built some prototypes, a car, a bike, a motorbike, and then a helicopter, and he's been testing them. And he's also got one of these big boxes as an engine to power a house. In fact, he says, he claims that you can use the car to also power the energy in your house. Very interesting. And he's been on this thing for a while. Of course, he was dismissed, and he's been totally dismissed by many people. And there's been now talks that big energy companies are sort of seeing him as a conspiracy theory, coming out with some kind of device. We've seen this before, it's not going to work. But the evidence is there. He's also built up a TV where you don't need to plug it in some other energy sources. And the system is made so much. I mean, people can go and Google it. There's plenty of, now a lot of people are covering him, his success. In fact, the president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, is now supporting him. University professors also are supporting him. So they're putting the reputation on the line. There is something there to look into. And I think big energy companies will still brand him as he's a competitor. If this energy sources and system really is true and is working the way it's saying, it will change the nature of energy production, consumption, but also the lives of people in Africa, where you can just put this, you don't even need to plug it, you get energy always on. You don't need to pay it from somebody. I mean, this is the most incredible, profound change that could take place if it does. But just very quick, finally, he's very worried that he's going to get killed. He's not the only one. A lot of people are worried that he might get killed and his invention is going to be destroyed by some other competitors were not happy with it. In fact, it may be true. And there's something that's happened in Africa. We haven't been connecting the dots. Young African Black scientists and inventors have been disappearing. We just don't know what's happening. Suddenly they get either they get some kind of cancer, they suddenly die or disappear, or they get sick and they disappear. And he himself, apparently, he said he was poisoned, and him and his co-founder were poisoned, and he managed to survive. His co-founder died. This is the state of this invention. It's extraordinary.
Now, what people are going to say is a perpetual motion machine, and they're going to say it breaks the laws, I think the second law of thermodynamics. How does this supposed to work? Have they gone into the mechanics of how this is supposed to function?
Well, to what I know is it hasn't been really made it privy to everybody, because he's worried that somebody will copy it or something. And in fact, in his own country, when he first came out with, and he went to sort of do the registration for intellectual property, he was told blankly that this breaks the laws of physics, and so we cannot register this as intellectual property.
Right.
I mean, what kind of nonsense is this? That because it breaks the laws of what we know, we won't register this as intellectual property. I mean, scientists who are genuine enough should be able to test this. I mean, in fact, there should be a lot of people sitting on this thing and having a conference on it and say, wait a minute, let's debunk this, or let's not debunk this, but not dismiss it as something that doesn't work. It's not because the laws of what we know, the laws that we know today, thermodynamics and so forth, that somebody has come up with something that perpetual energy is not possible. But it is true, perpetual energy is possible. The universe is running on perpetual energy, for goodness sake. And so the scientific mindset that can't understand that something else can come up. It could be at the boundaries of sciences. It could be something that Nikola Tesla was working on and probably nobody knows about. But if you ask me personally, I think this is a threat to the current status quo business model. And if this thing were to be used, many industries will just flop and will lose billions of trillions of dollars. And as you know, the energy industry is perhaps one of the biggest one in the world and the most powerful. They won't let this happen so quickly.
Well, they wouldn't want it. Let's be clear, right? I mean, there have been so many people who've come out with perpetual energy devices saying, this is going to go on forever. And all of them have, up to this point, have been shown to be false. And so there's a huge skepticism around this idea of, okay, here's another person with another device that they're saying is perpetual motion machine. And it's like, okay, well, where is the energy coming from? There's that question. How does this work mechanically? Because, there's an argument to be made where people say, well, you can pull a massive amount of energy out of an empty cup that would run the world for X amount of time. How you get that energy is a secondary question. Because at that point, it's not perpetual motion. The energy is coming from somewhere. It's coming from the ether of space of sorts. And I'm saying ether, even though I know they don't use that term.
What he's saying is apparently he gets it from radio frequencies. And yes, which is another crazy idea. And Nikola Tesla was also doing such a thing way back. But he doesn't want to disclose it yet. But if the evidence is there, you've got a car that's running with it. You've got an helicopter that's running with it. You have a motorbike that's running with it. You have a TV. For goodness sake, weren't they testing him, putting him to, evidence? And one day said, hey, let's open this thing and tell us, making a big deal of it. Exactly. Or they can dismiss him and something's going to happen to their business if they keep dismissing it, because the Chinese are watching this thing very closely. It's going to have an effect on their own EV business as well, but the Chinese are more adaptable and they can use this, turn it around, and then boom.
Now, if that happens and you get Chinese scientists building stuff with it, then you're off to the races, right?
Because then you can use that. You don't need fuel for airplanes. You don't need fuel for jets. You don't need fuel for anything. I mean, this is a miracle source of energy. It's unbelievable. And as you said again, the Chinese can take it and refine it and build on top of it and even make it more powerful. Who
Yeah, they can
knows
burn
if
with
they haven't already done so? We don't know.
I guess we will see if this guy
Mm,
puts it out in a way where the public can kind of regard it. Again, I need
yeah,
to understand the mechanics of it, right? Like I have seen people come up with this idea of energy out of nowhere, out
yeah.
of these kind of devices. Up to this point, they have not been shown to be, meaning the second law of thermodynamics has been pretty resilient. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
up to this point, we haven't seen anything to break it, even though that doesn't mean that something would come up that would refine physics. I mean, that's the beauty of science. It's falsifiable. All of this stuff can be falsified if indeed new evidence
Well,
comes out.
remember what people have been saying till, all these gravity machines were showing up in New Jersey and the
Right.
Atlantic coast. They couldn't figure out where these things were coming from. How can they can speed at specific? I mean, these are breaking the laws of physics that we know. So
True.
that means there's still room for many of the things we don't know. In
Oh,
fact,
I
our
accept that.
science, yeah, our
Just to be
science
clear,
is so primitive we can't even fix poverty and other things. We can't
look,
even fix so many
I am
things.
a
Yeah.
UFO guy. I was the UFO person at my network. Like literally, they
Yeah.
created a position for me at the network. And as I used to
Ex-
point out, I only need
yeah.
one example of something that breaks the laws of physics to break the law of physics.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
if this stuff is flying in our airspace in ways that seem to be doing that, okay, well, that's proof of concept. Like the
Mm.
Nimitz is proof of concept. These are like for me. So it's not off the table for me. I just want to point that out.
Yes. I
It is a
must
high
tell you,
bar.
I mean, I'm in your corner as well. I'm skeptical, but I also want to open my mind and say, test this guy, question him, and
Yes.
let's see where we are. If people are uncomfortable that a young Zimbabwean Black African can come out with such an energy, if it's about a race issue, or is it about science, or is it about race, or is it about what is it?
I think it's
We
both.
need to know there is already have some testing proofs. So let's test him there.
Yeah, you have my agreement. You have my agreement on that. I
Yes.
got to bring up the Congo and the
Yes.
conflict that seems to be taking
Mm.
place there. Can you explain why there's a conflict in the Congo? And let's step into that one before we close.
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on. I mean, this is the most shameful and awful situation that's been going on. More than 10 million people have died. The genocide happening in the Eastern Congo is just unacceptable. And at the heart of it is basically the search for resources. It's been happening since 1884, 1885, when the Europeans were scrambling for resources in Africa. And the Congo has been one of the places where, the harshness of the Belgian Congo king, King Leopold, has taken place. And of course, it's still ongoing. And there it's about the resources, you know, um, all sorts of resources, including the resources that we know that are, rare earth minerals that are powering, the cell phone industry and other very important industries around the world. Uranium that was used in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima because they had some really good consistency, density. In fact, we're aware that Einstein sent a letter to President, I think it was Roosevelt or so, telling him, please don't leave this high, pure uranium in the hands of Black people. They don't deserve to be running this and managing it. So it is still ongoing. That is the source of the problem in that place, as it is for in many places. But in the Congo, it's now done by proxy. So big companies, Apple, Samsung, and all sort of other big companies are using those proxies. And one country and one leader that's been accused of playing that game. Oh, there are two of them. The first one is President Kagame of Rwanda, and then the second one is President Museveni of Uganda. And as you know, they've been really strong. They've positioned themselves very strongly in that region where they're using, I mean, there are more than 100 groups of quote unquote rebels in that eastern DRC country that are exploiting and extracting and selling those minerals. According to some report by the United Nations, Kigali has now become the capital of commerce, a trade area where people can sell all these minerals. And Kigali doesn't have, Rwanda doesn't have all these minerals. But President Kagame, Paul Kagame, has always been in denial, even with the evidence that's there. And many people are dying. I mean, recently, 14 South African soldiers died there at the hands of a movement called the M23, which is supported by President Kagame. There's plenty of evidence for that. But Kagame has still been in denial. Last week, there was a meeting in East Africa. There was some kind of fighting over, who to blame and so forth. They managed to come out of there, but nothing is cleared yet. It's still very, very tricky. And the tension is there among African leaders who are now playing the game. They become the toys and the proxy from outsiders. This is exactly the thing that many people and many Africans have been dreading for decades. And it's still going to go on until Africans can control their territory. I mean, the DRC is about 2 million and more, 2,600,000 or 400,000 square kilometers. This is a huge country, right? About, I think, the US is 9 million. So 2 million, roughly, you got about a fourth of the United States. So it's difficult to police, but also the leaders of the countries themselves are not as good as we would have hoped.
What's wild about that, I don't know if people have read King Leopold's Soliloquy. It was by Mark Twain. And that book opened my eyes to what was taking place in the Congo. This genocide that was taking place. And just for the audience, if they haven't read the book, Mark Twain, the entire book is a soliloquy. It is the point of view of the leader of the Congo and the Belgian king, I believe, at the time.
Leopold.
And he was King Leopold, and he was given this excuse. The entire book is an excuse. It's we got to do this. We're doing the right thing. This isn't horrible. I know a lot of people are getting killed, but we didn't really have a choice. And these people being killed, the entire book is almost this kind of weird soliloquy of him giving his reasons and justifications for a genocide dealing with rubber in the Congo. It is fascinating.
That's
and
right.
So it's disheartening, 200-300 years later, that we're still here having this similar conversation, even though it's now Africans that are effectively running it. Do you see any progress towards peace in this?
I don't see any progress at this stage. It's going to take a bit more time. I mean, even the African Union that met this past week is still struggling to find a way around it. I mean, the African Union spends more time sending envoy to Ukraine. Remember the last time, a couple of years ago, with Chairman Macky Sall going to beg for food. I mean, it's just unthinkable sometimes how our leaders behave. We don't know what they're smoking and what's going on, or if they're under threat. There's an energy. I mean, I have to say this. I say this all the time to colleagues. I just don't understand what's going on. They sign contracts that don't make sense about minerals. I use this Chinese metaphor. It's called the beggar with the golden bowl. So Africans they're sitting on gold, yet so it's a story about that beggar. He has a golden bowl. Every morning he wakes up and goes and begs with that golden bowl. And somebody asked him one day, he said, but wait a minute. Do you know what you're begging with? You have something. Do you know what it is? And the beggar didn't know what it was, but it sort of hinted at, and the guy had to tell him, look, this is gold. Where did you get it? Say I found it somewhere else. So that means there's more gold where the beggar found it. And he can't make a case, but he goes around begging. It's the same thing today what African leaders are doing. They have a golden bowl. They go around pretending that they're looking for foreign direct investment, while there's tons of resources they can use to get the money they need to develop their countries and the continent. It's just shameful and unacceptable again.
But why do they miss it? I guess is the question. Because you're right, Africa is full of resources, full of things that they can pull out of the earth. I mean, that part of the reason for colonization, right, was that, hey, look at this rich country that we can now exploit. Okay, so why can't the African Union do that? Why don't they do that? Why don't they see it as a golden
Because they're
bowl?
captured. Jamal, they're captured. All our leaders were there, either I wouldn't say uneducated, but the greed elements that's with them is that they always have to depend on somebody else. It's just unthinkable. You take Angola. Angola doesn't need foreign direct investment from the United States. South Africa doesn't because the private sector here is flush with everything. And they have minerals that you can't find anywhere. I mean, you and I talked about this a couple of years ago. Remember iridium,
Yes,
that mineral rare. South Africa is the first producer of it, right? 1 ton apparently costs billions. South Africa is first producer. And guess who's the second producer, as we discussed it a couple of years ago? Haiti.
that's right.
Haiti is the second, yes. And the place where the area where the iridium is kept is now under the control of US troops.
Of course. Of
so,
course.
so those leaders are now, they have some kind of allegiance to outsiders. For some reason, they can't figure it out. That's one of the reasons what's happening in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is such a almost a revolution because these leaders are saying, we like you. You said to us that we've been poor for many years and we're asking you, please leave us alone. We will develop. The World Bank and the IMF went to Burkina Faso and said, look, you've just paid off your loan, but we still want to loan you money. President Ibrahim Traore said, please, I don't want your money. Leave us alone. We'll organize it. And that's the kind of sovereignty that is missing with other African countries that most people in Africa are now thirsting for. I mean, you can see the youth, people. I mean, this young president, military guy, has become like Che Guevara or some other. I mean, he's idolized everywhere. And so it's not about the fact that he's idolized, but it's that the idea and the ideal behind his position is so powerful. It's liberating. It has a sense of sovereignty. And people want that sovereignty, being politically, economically, minerals, and so forth. That's what they want. But most of our leaders are stuck into this slave sort of begging bowl mentality that they can't really get out of them. But it could be that they're pledged, I don't know what it is that they pledged, maybe blood, they're part of secret societies. We don't know. Yeah. And now we're stuck with these guys. They can't think. I mean, look at Cameroon, President Biya, for more than 40 years. He's 92. He hasn't done much with the wealth of his country. Take Gabon, same thing. I mean, all of these countries have wealth. Same for Uganda. Uganda is just sitting. I mean, I was telling you last year on your old show that there was a discovery of a gold deposit that was estimated at 13 trillion US dollars.
Oh,
13 trillion. I mean, Jamal. And guess what? It's disappeared out of the news. When it comes to gold, there's a mafia, it seems, that takes all these stories out of the news. I wrote about it I think last year or the year before. I mean, with such a deposit, what would you do? You don't
anything
need
you
more
want.
money.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's shocking. I don't know how our leaders are thinking. There's something warped in their system, and that's what needs to really being destroyed or reset.